Value describes the range of lightness and darkness applied to a two-dimensional artwork. In drawing, the more marks that you accumulate, the darker the value becomes. The same is true about the amount of pressure you apply with your drawing tool. The more pressure applied, the darker the mark it produces. If a particular area of value gets too dark, you can use your eraser to lighten it or even remove it altogether. In representational drawing, value is used to create an illusion of light and shadow. Since everything in the three-dimensional world is affected by light and shadow, using a range of value in your drawing will make the subject of your two-dimensional artwork appear more dimensional. When you observe the effects of light and shadow, it is helpful to break it down into its corresponding shapes of value. A value scale is a helpful tool to visualize the range of values you observe. A traditional value scale ranges from 0% white to 100% black, with grays in 10% increments. Now for a more detailed explanation about how light illuminates objects and what to look for in your drawing. The highlight is the brightest spot of value on an object. It represents the area directly facing the light source. Light often comes from above. Think both the sun and ceiling lights. So the highlight is often at or near the top of an object. The lightest values of your object should be reserved for its highlights. These may be 0% white, but they could also be a light gray, depending on how dark the local value, or the overall color of your object, is. Brighter lights also tend to create brighter highlights. As the object continues away from the light source, you'll observe a gradation of midtones. These generally start as values that are just darker than the highlight and progress toward values just lighter than the core shadow. The core shadow is the darkest part of the object. This is generally the furthest visible part of the object from the light source. The core shadow may get to 100% black, but again, it depends how dark the local value of the object is, as well as how intense the light is. Between the core shadow and the furthest visible edge of the object is often a small area of reflected light. This represents light that bounces off the ground to subtly illuminate the edge of the object. Because it's diffused light, it's often just a bit lighter than your core shadow. Finally, all objects have a cast shadow. This is always directly opposite the light source and is shaped like a stretched out or flattened version of your object. The cast shadow is generally darkest directly under the object and may diffuse a bit the further away it goes. Its value is determined by how bright the light source is, as well as the local value of the surface it's cast on. Thinking back to the value scale, you can associate a percentage to any area of value you observe. In this diagram, the highlight appears to be 0% white, while the midtones range from 10 to 60% gray. The core shadows around 70 to 90%, the reflected lights around 20%, and the cast shadows between 60 and 80%. In more complex studies like the folds and drapery, the transitions between highlight, midtone, core shadow, and cast shadow may repeat throughout the same object multiple times, and generally in that order. It's worth noting that you do not need to draw contour lines to separate one shape of value from another. In fact, dark lines added between shapes of value or objects tend to visually flatten the dimensionality of the drawing. As long as the two edges are different values from each other, our eyes are able to observe the difference. Don't forget to also designate values to the foreground and background of your drawing. Even a surface with a local value of white will appear gray due to atmospheric conditions. One simple trick for starting with at least a base value throughout your drawing is to apply a material ground before you start. If you are working with charcoal, for example, you can use the broad side of a piece of fine charcoal to add a middle gray throughout the page. This way, you can get darker values by adding more material to your page, and lighter values by erasing back to the white of the paper.